Hello, my little seventh graders. This goes for the whole grade, even though I don't have all of you. I wanted to create just a very brief video. I hope it's brief. We'll find out. That goes over the Cold War as a whole and then explains the ideas about this essay that we are assigning you. So please be patient and let's go through to see what we've got. Now, the essay is asking you to do the following. You're going to explain how the events from 1949 to 1991 were a Cold War. You're going to write a paper that's no longer than 3 pages typed. It will be double-spaced, Times New Roman, MLA format, third person. That means no I, no us, no our, no we, no me, no it's all third person. Just state the facts, would you? Now, you're going to have an introduction. We're going to show you how to do that. Your first sentence states the definition of the Cold War and when it happened. Then you'll give us 2 to 3 sentences that include 2 to 3 events between 1949 and 1991 that made this era a Cold War. You know, now that I see that, really, this should be 1945 because the atomic bombs. So that's an error on my part, and I'm also going to correct one more thing that Miss Jordan and I went through. So we're going to start with 1945 to 1991. Now, we say that the essay is going to include the following terms: containment, the Soviet Union, the Berlin Wall, the Berlin airlift, President Ronald Reagan, the Cuban Missile Crisis, the Bay of Pigs invasion, Vietnam War, the space race, Yalta, and the Korean War. Miss Jordan and I are taking the Korean War out of there. We just don't really think it's that big of a deal because we didn't put it in the document, and so we don't want to give you guys any more confusion. Now, Yalta is not in the document, but it is on the board in my classroom, which is the little thing down here, which I'm going to go over and walk everyone through what's going on here. So we're going to go chronologically. This may take a minute, but y'all got to be patient. And y'all got to understand that this is for you. Okay? So this is the stuff that needs to go in the essay. If you really want to put more in it, you are more than welcome to, but the paper may be no longer than 3 pages typed, double space times that. Just that, okay? So again, how were the events below from 1945 to 1991 a Cold War? So we're going to go through this very quickly, this document. You are going to be reading the document. You are going to have to write a couple of things down that explain the following, but I'd like to walk you through this timeline very briefly. So let's go back in time, okay? It's 1945, before the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So it's 1945 at Yalta. Yalta was a conference. It was a meeting where Great Britain, the United States, the Soviet Union, so Winston Churchill, President Harry S. Truman, and Joseph Stalin, the leaders at the time, they decided to meet at Yalta, a conference, to say, all right, what are we going to do with Germany after the war? Obviously, the Third Reich, Nazi Germany, that's going to disappear. How are we going to divide it? How should Europe be fixed? And so they met to say, this is what we're going to do. We're going to divide Germany into 4 zones. We'll have an American zone. These zones are controlled by the following. We'll have a zone that's controlled by the Soviet Union, a zone that's controlled by the United States, a zone that's controlled by France, and a zone that's controlled by Great Britain. Eventually, it's going to fall to really just the United States and the Soviet Union. And that's going to be in the document a little later. Now, just after Yalta, in July of 1945, at a conference called Potsdam, Harry S. Truman is sitting next to Joseph Stalin and says, hey, we have a new weapon that we've created. And this is likely going to be, the big deal that changes the war. So Germany's already surrendered, but now it's about Japan. So a couple weeks later in August, Hiroshima and Nagasaki are bombed, the atomic bombs. You watch the video. So Hiroshima and Nagasaki are bombed. The war ends. So 1945, August, World War II ends. Now, after World War II, what do we got to do? After World War II, again, it's divided. Germany is divided. Now you have what's called a Soviet side. I'm going to scroll down a little bit. At the end of World War II, we're going to have this Soviet communist side of Germany and part of Europe. And then we're also going to have, this is it. So you're going to have a Soviet side, which is going to be communist. And this is the Iron Curtain that Winston Churchill is referring to. That there's a barrier between Soviet nations and democratic nations. And this Iron Curtain, you got to think about it like iron is a metal. It's dividing, and it says that one part of Europe is going to be Soviet controlled, which is communist. The rest of the world, the rest of Europe is going to be capitalist. And remember, in communism, you're only trading within the Union. So the Soviet Union is made up of Poland, East Germany, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Yugoslavia, Romania, Bulgaria. These are all now taken under control by the Soviet Union. So these countries only trade in the Soviet Union. These countries, the blue countries, do not trade with the red countries. So that's where the divide is. That's the idea behind communism versus capitalism. Now, one of the things the United States said was, we should contain communism. We should prevent communism from spreading elsewhere. If we can contain communism from spreading, then that means we'll be able to trade with these countries. Like, we got to make sure that West Germany doesn't fall to communism. We as the United States need to contain communism just in East Germany and prevent it from spreading. That's the concept of containment. I just have to scroll down and make sure my ducks are in a row. My ducks are in a row. So I'm going to go back up. See, right here it says containment. President Truman says he wants to prevent Soviet Union, he wants to prevent all of this from spreading. So containment, the idea of containing communism, preventing it to spread, which might lead to war. I'm going to go back up, scroll. Hey, timeline. Now, after the war, Germany is absolutely destroyed, just absolutely destroyed, okay? In 1947, the United States government comes up with this plan to give $400 million worth of goods to Europe. And then in 1948, it turns into this Berlin airlift. Think about what's going on in Israel and Gaza. An airlift means dropping supplies for people in need. So it's 1948 in Berlin. Berlin is divided, okay? Berlin is divided between East and West Berlin. And so we see that there is we see that Berlin has a Soviet communist side and a free democratic side. So this Berlin airlift begins in 1948, where the United States drops 200,000 planes worth of food, medical supplies, water, clothing, etc. And the reason why this was done was to make sure that the Soviet side of Berlin saw how much the American side of Berlin was helping out, and it really angered the Soviet side because Western Germany is getting all of these supplies from the capitalist countries, and the Soviet Union side isn't getting these things. So it really makes the United States look like kind of like the hero, I guess. Now, what eventually happens is the Iron Curtain becomes a real boundary. So this is what was going on in the 1940s and 50s. Finally, in 1961, the Berlin Wall is going to be constructed. On one side of Berlin, it's communist, Eastern Germany. On one side of Berlin, it's going to be Western Germany, which is capitalist. So communist versus capitalist. And when you watch this video about the Berlin Wall, which I hope you watch, you got to watch this video. The video is really good. We don't put videos in here for you to not watch them. This video really explains why Eastern and Western Berlin were so divided. And again, the United States wanted to make sure that communism didn't spread. So I go back up to the timeline. All right. I'm only going to go through the stuff that goes into the paper. Now, in 1955 right here, in 1955, the Soviet Union detonated the hydrogen bomb, the most powerful weapon in all of human history. So now the United States isn't the only country that has the atomic bomb. And that starts the arms race. The arms race was a time to figure out which country was going to make more weapons, which country was going to have the most dominant military. And so the Soviet Union and the United States, they just built hundreds to thousands of nuclear weapons, atomic weapons. And this era of what we call an arms race was huge, because now we're seeing that the United States and the Soviet Union are finding a way to out-atomic each other. Well, the arms race turns into a space race. In 1957, the Soviet Union launched Sputnik, which is a Russian satellite launched into the atmosphere. Actually, I guess it would be just outside the atmosphere. It's space. So this is Sputnik, by the way. So the Soviet Union launches a missile, and in this missile, it becomes a satellite, Sputnik. Now it shows that the Russians are ahead. They've detonated the biggest bomb ever. They've launched the first satellite into the atmosphere. On top of that, they sent a dog into space. The dog dies. And then they finally send a person into space. And then they send a woman into space. It's like, God, the Soviets they are crushing it. Finally, in like 1961, even though the first woman goes into space in 63, Yuri Gagarin enters safely into space. The United States finally catches up and sends someone into space. President John F. Kennedy in 1962 says that this arms race, it's about going to the moon. Okay, it's about getting to the moon and back. So this shows that timeline of what happens in the arms race, where you've got Kennedy and you've got Khrushchev, the leader of the Soviet Union. They're arguing over who's going to lead, who's going to be on top of this arms race. So the arms race turns into building more nuclear weapons, building more space satellites and more rockets to go into space. Eventually, what happens is, well, the United States doesn't contain communism, because unfortunately what happens is communism, according to the United States, the United States sees the communism go to Asia when it goes to China, and then it eventually goes to Korea in the 1950s, and finally it reaches Cuba. Now, the reason why Cuba is a big deal, Cuba's right next door, okay? Korea is not close, and just there you go. But Cuba's next door. So in 1961, the United States sees that communism is now dominating, and it's by a man named Fidel Castro. The United States tries to invade Cuba to overthrow the government. The Bay of Pigs is just the name of a bay, okay? I don't know why it's called the Bay of Pigs. There's no bacon, whatever. So the attempted raid by the United States, utter disaster. The men are captured, some are killed. It basically shows that, you know what? The communists in Cuba will be superior. They will reign. And then on top of it, the United States flies over Cuba and notices this, which is an area where the Soviets are helping the Cubans build nuclear weapons and nuclear missiles. So the United States realizes, oh man, if Cuba creates, if the Soviet Union puts nuclear weapons in Cuba, then, oh my, like even Atlanta's on the map. We could get bombed. It's only 751 miles away. So the United States and the Soviet Union and Cuba, they face really like a big moment, because this Cuban Missile Crisis was an era where what was going to happen? Within a 13-day period, the United States and the Soviet Union and Cuba were in contact with each other of, will the Soviets launch a missile attack to the United States? Will Cuba be the country that supports it? It's a big deal. So that's the Cuban Missile. Luckily, no missiles were sent, and luckily, the Cold War remained cold. So that means there was no physical fighting. But it was a big deal, because Cuba remained communist for quite some darn time. Now, I scroll up here. The space race, I have it up here. The space race, which is still the arms race, the space race really ends in July of 1969 when the United States puts a man on the moon, Neil Armstrong. So it starts with Sputnik. It then continues when the Soviets send a man into space, and then in 1961, the United States sends someone into space, and then in July of 1969, the space race ends with the United States sending a man on the moon with the Apollo 11 mission. So now the space race is over. The Soviets dominated it first, and then the Americans, I guess, won. I'm going to stop us there for this video, and then I'm going to make a second one for you in a hot minute. But I do want you to think about, sorry I'm scrolling through so much, but I do want you to think about the timeline of what's going on here and how the timeline will then help you write the essay. All right, so video 1 is done.